Welcome to NX After Dark. Today we're continuing the Energy Insights Angular application. And last time we set up a workspace using NX 12 and Angular 12. Today we're going to do some final configurations that we want for now. And then I'm going to start implementing the first data access library using NgRx Component Store, because that's really my cup of tea. That or Rx Angular, but yeah, I'm using NgRx Component Store today. Here we go. This is my my homemade background. It's not quite after dark yet, but the sun is setting in Denmark. It's just past 9 p.m. Beautiful weather. Still not much wind, so energy today is probably not looking too great. Have a look. You might remember, if you've seen the last episode, that I'm going to visualize some of the public data about the Danish energy grid. Let's look at how the CO2 emission is right now. So it's very high in the coming 4 hours or so until midnight, and then early morning it will become pretty low. If you want to say that, yeah, hey Michael, yeah, you're here for the component store, I know. Yeah, if we want to say that Denmark is green, it should really be below 80 grams per kilowatt hour. So this is talking about CO2 equivalent emission gases, greenhouse gases. So not too great. Let's see, the last hour we had 35% wind and solar power. Again, it's dark and there's not a lot of wind, so it's actually pretty good for this time of day. Well, it would be better if there was a lot of wind. But fortunately, we usually get a lot of hydropower, excess hydropower from Sweden and Norway as well. But yeah, I want to visualize this data first. This data set here, the CO2 emission forecast or prognosis, which they wrongfully call it, in my opinion. So here in Denmark, we have two price areas. DK1, which is Western Denmark connected to Norway and Germany and Netherlands, and DK2, which is Eastern Denmark connected to Sweden. And yeah, do we have one across the Baltic? Yeah, I think we do. I think we have one to Eastern Europe as well. So as you can see here, today is the 19th, and this forecast is showing the 20th, the whole day of the 20th as well. So that is tomorrow. This next day forecast is released, I think it's around 3 o'clock in the afternoon or 5 minutes past. But yeah, I'll show whatever data is available. So let's get into this NX workspace. This is what we created yesterday. Energy Insights is on my GitHub profile now. So this is all open source if you want to have a look. I'll just be making some minor configurations to start with. Let's see the editor config. Is there something I usually put in here? Yeah, I could do this. I could say if we have CSS or SASE CSS files, I want to use single quotes. If I'm in an HTML file, for example, an Angular component template file, which I won't be using. I'll be using inline templates. I'm getting into single file components these days. So I want everything in one file, including the modules and the templates and the styles. But if I had one, it would be okay to have 120 characters. Let's see, we also have some configuration files like JSON files, YAML, and YML, which is also YAML, which is a stupid language, but we have to use it. They can also have infinite length, basically. Yeah. Because the wrapping by prettier is not always pretty. It actually adds some noise to the YAML configurations, especially. Markdown files, yeah, the max line length 120. And in the TS files, I want to use single quotes. Okay. Is there anything else here for formatting? Let's look in the prettier configuration. Prose wrap, yeah. Single quote, yes. Print with 80 arrow parens avoid. Yeah, those are my prettier settings. And right now I'm just pushing to main, but we'll start doing real pull requests for this feature. Okay, we also set up our GitHub Actions workflow last time, a basic one, but good enough for now. But I just want to add some. Hey, Klaplati, please zoom in the editor. Okay, well, I usually have it here where you can see 30 lines of code in one screen. That's usually big enough, but I can give it one more notch, but then it starts to become quite annoying for everyone. So yeah, I only have HD 720p, so that's the reason why you might not be able to see it, or if you're on a small screen. So this is the best I'm going to do. So hopefully that's good enough. Okay, let's add some environment variables for this workflow. This is shared across the jobs in this workflow. So we will, no, this is not needed. Node options, yeah. So Node.js is, you might know that it's by default, it's configured to maximum of 2 gigabytes of RAM, which is not a lot. So especially with tooling like NX and all our web tooling, it quickly runs out of RAM. So most machines, including ZIs, have at least 6 gigabytes you can afford to set aside to allocate to Node.js. So we do this like so. Node will look for this option whenever Node is started. Now let's configure. Let's add the proper NX environment variables as well, so that it's grouped nicer in the NX cloud dashboard. For that, we just need to add this github.event number, and that will group it per branch, which will be visible in the dashboard. And then there will even be, let's see, run ID will show the individual runs in the same branch. Yeah, this is what we need for NX Cloud. And if you saw it last time, you might see that I'm using pnpm instead of yarn or npm. And I had an issue with, okay, good that it's a bit better. It won't be nice for anyone, I think, if I zoom in more than this. So, yes. Yeah, so I had an issue with Cypress, so I just removed end-to-end testing. Hello, Serkan. Nice to see you today. So I removed Cypress because I really don't need it. And but it turned out, I was trying it out today at work, and it was actually an issue with the newest version of pnpm and Cypress. And I simply couldn't figure out what the problem was. So someone tell Cypress or pnpm or whatever. I think I tried every possible configuration I could find, and I couldn't solve it. So yeah, there are some issues sometimes with pnpm, sadly, because it's the best option. It's the fastest option. But yeah, it has to do with Cypress using some really old dependencies that are not nice and modern. But I'll make an update if I ever figure out how to make it work. For now, I'll do without Cypress in this project. What else? Well, we could add cache for caching our pnpm store, but it was already very fast, so there's not really a reason to do that yet. But GitHub Actions does have an action to cache, for example. Well, we won't cache a node modules folder, but we'll cache the PNPM's own global cache folder between the runs, because it's always running on a fresh image of a machine. But we can copy in the cached PNPM artifact from the last time. But there's no need for that yet. So what else? We could share the node version and say we want 14.x because we're using Angular 12, so it's finally supporting this version of Node, the newest major version, stable major version. So we'll do like so that we can easily switch it out between all the jobs. Like that. Okay. Anything else? So we have our triggers. After a merge to main, this workflow will be run on every pull request, no matter the branch it's targeting, on every workflow dispatch, which is the manual trigger for GitHub workflows. And now that we have merged this one, we should be able to see a button on github.com actually to run this manually. But yeah, we'll do it at some point. Oh yeah, let's see. We have a linting task. Here it is, our linting job, and I actually don't want to run this if it's a pull request. So if GitHub event name is push. Wait. No, if it's pull request, then we'll run linting. If not, we'll fix it in the next pull request. There's not really, I don't want to push to the main anyways. So, and I certainly don't want it to block my deploy just because of a linting error. So yeah, so now this will only be run on pull requests, not in the merge run of this workflow. Anything else about PNPM? Yeah, we could add some more options here. We could say, what could we say? We could say reported silent to not have a lot of logs from it. We would have to turn that off if something went wrong, but yeah, I actually want to leave it in so that we might work on that Cypress problem at a later point. Do we want to be okay with pros and log files? Yes. I don't know, remember if this is the default, but I'll set it here explicitly. What about this verifying the store integrity? No, I don't want to spend time doing that actually. So this will be the pnpm install command in our steps. Yeah, this is good. We're missing a deploy job, but we don't have a host yet. This is just a web app, and the backend is a public API. So yeah, I might just deploy it to GitHub pages as soon as we have the first version ready. So we'll do that later as well. Let's see what we have here. We have configure node, pnpm, and nx. Good. Let's see what we have. We have just one app. At some point, we're going to extract some of these generated files into separate libraries. For now, let's look at our dependency graph from NX. And you can see that we just have this one problem project, the app project, the Energy Insights app project. So what do we want to have? We want to have a host, yes. We want to have a deploy job, yes. We want to have a deploy job, yes. We want to have a host, yes. We want to have a deploy job, 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 yes. We want to have a dep well, the application should only be connecting to, well, I want it to connect to some kind of a shell module, and that shell module or library will then connect to a feature library. That feature library will then be able to access the data access library, which is what we're going to build today. So we're going to build a disconnected project right now, and we'll use the tests to create it instead of testing it manually through the UI, and the UI will come later. And we're using NX, so we have Jest for our automated unit tests. So I usually use what's called Wallaby. Let's see if it works today. I've been having some issues after it updated, but I might get lucky. Yeah, okay, it's running. So Wallaby is a paid tool. It runs the tests in the background, and I don't think I have any tests intentionally, but as soon as we'll add some, we'll see that I start getting these inline messages if a test is failing or if I'm logging some output through the console. Similar to what you might be used to from ESLint extensions or TSLint extensions or whatever, but for the tests. And that is really a nice, quick feedback. I don't have to wait for test runners. It's a lot faster. It's keeping the tests hot as I'm working. And I don't even have to save the file for the test to run again. So really a powerful tool if you're doing a lot of automated unit tests. Okay, so now we want to generate our first library. And which domains do we want to have? We want to have some grouping folders here. So let's say we want a domain about CO2. So now I want to use my NX console and generate an Angular library. And now I want to look at my, I'll close this down for a second, and then I want to look at my defaults, which is in my workspace configuration. My defaults for my the different generators, I already set them up for Angular application. And now let's look at the Angular library generator. I have some defaults here that I want. Let's look at the other options. And I don't want to go, do I want to go with buildable libraries? No, not right now. It's still a small project, and I've been having some issues with that on Windows, that it's not really faster. So why would I do it? But that would be used for incremental builds. But sadly, it hasn't been working well for me on Windows. Prefix. Okay, let's set up the prefix. And I think I made the prefix of energy. I know, clever. The app is called Energy Insights. Publishable, that would be if we would create it for the NPM registry to publish there. Routing, no, we don't want routing by default. Strict tags, okay. Tags shouldn't be, there shouldn't be a default tag, but we should definitely add some tags. Okay, so these are the defaults we need for this project. Configure the library generator defaults. And now this was on the main branch. I'll push those commits, and now I'll actually branch out. This is a feature branch, and it's for the CO2 data access library. So I'll run it again just to have my defaults here. So I'll call it data access. A dry run is starting here by NX console. Data access Well, it will already be in the CO2 folder, so I don't need to name it CO2, but normally I would do that, but it happens to fit with the name of this grouping folder, the domain grouping folder. What else we need? We need some tags for sure, some NX tags. Here they are. So I will say type data access library, and I'll add a scope, and that will be CO2. And we haven't really set up any linting rules, workspace linting rules yet for which types of libraries can access other ones, but we'll do that when we have a few more of them. So creating this library, let's see what we're getting. Here it is in the CO2 grouping folder. It's a library, and an NX library doesn't mean that it's reusable necessarily, or that it's meant to be published on an npm package. A library, this is a workspace library, so it's an encapsulated set of code that corresponds to, for example, a layer of a part of our application. So this is the CO2 part of our application, and it's in the data access layer. Well, actually, it contains a few layers. Like it will have, this one will have persistence. It will have an HTTP client, which is for the persistence layer, and it will have state management for using NgRx Component Store. So we got our library, and everything is set up here. So the README file, the CO2 data access, HTTP, persistence, and state management, local state management. And it should be added here. Yeah. So now this is the just workspace configuration, which is also used by my Wallaby tool here. But NX is managing this configuration. We also see an entry here in the tsconfig base JSON, because now it's set up this path mapping so that I can import it using this name in the other libraries or in the application. So that references this path, lib, CO2 data access source, the index file. So that's the entry point for this library. That's where we should be exporting everything we want to be usable outside of this library. So that would be services like the NgRx Component Store. Yeah, Workspace JSON also has a project for this library, and it has one target, test. Oh, and also the linting target. Yeah, so it doesn't have a build target intentionally on my behalf. So let's go with this. Generate CO2 data access library. And what do we need now? Now we need NgRx Component Store. So let's say we're using pnpm. So I'll say pnpm add NgRx Component Store. And it's a self-contained library. So here I must have set up some configuration which is confusing pnpm. Oh, it might be because I updated the major version of pnpm since yesterday on my machine. So now it's just recreating the node modules folder. But we'll be installing NgRx Component Store, and it doesn't depend on any other NgRx package. It's self-contained. It can be used to combine it with the NgRx Store, for example. If you want to subscribe to observables from the global NgRx Store, you can do that using the NgRx Component Store, but it's not a requirement. So that's good to know. It's a standalone library from NgRx and pretty small. Okay, so are we good now to add NgRx Component Store? Oh, we're at version 12. Nice, we're in sync with Angular. So now is the question, does this one have an ng-add schematic? I don't think so. There's not really any global setup. It's a local isolated service, but let's just try for fun. Because if there was one, we're not able to use ng-add with NgRx, or sorry, NX CLI, but we are able to call that schematic manually if it exists. So it would be called ng-add for Angular libraries. Okay, there is actually a schematic. I didn't know that. I wonder what that is doing. Exciting stuff. Wait, what's this? Okay. PNPM is doing some interesting stuff. So where's my node modules? I have no idea right now. Oh, the joy of front-end tooling. That's really strange. That's really strange. Node modules. NgRx. No, not going to give you that. Okay, so something strange happened with PNPM, maybe. So I'm going to, something went really wrong now. So I'm going to delete it. Oh, it really went wrong this time. Reload the window. So this was the recommendations for Visual Studio Code that's configured for this workspace, Sarkan. So I could see here the Jest Runner and here the NX console. I already have these ones installed. But this one I haven't installed it because I'm using Wallaby instead. Yeah. So, but there was a button so that new developers joining this this project can click a button to get all the recommended tools. Okay, PowerShell died, so something very strange happened. Let me just shut down some processes. I have a lot of Windows subsystem for Linux running. I don't even remember if that's normal for this machine. Let's try to completely restart VS Code. Okay, now we have a terminal. I'll use no thanks. I don't show again. Oh. Yes, I'll decide the extensions. Okay, delete my node modules folder. I'll actually also delete my log file for PNPM. Come on. And now I'll run PNPM install again. Something went wrong after I downloaded the latest major version since yesterday, I think. So now let's see how fast it is. 1,200 dependencies. A lot of them cached. 50 downloaded. Starting to add them to the node modules here. Something is really hogging my machine right now. I wonder what it is. definitely need to get some more RAM. I only have 16 gigabytes. And front-end tooling will eat that up in a moment. Okay, so now we have the NgRx Component Store. And let's try to run that schematic again, if there is one. And now I can see my node modules. Okay, that's looking better. So does it actually have schematics? It does. Okay, nice. NgAdd. Okay, it's not happy about that file. Strange. Wow, it's really not happy about that one. Okay, I have no idea what the NgAdd schematic would do for Component Store. That's unexpected. Yeah. Anyways, this commit is add NgRx Component Store. What did it do? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Okay, great. Thank you for all that trouble. Okay, so now we have our, let's get back to our library, our data access library for the CO2 emissions. And it generated this module. We don't need an Angular module. That's one of the benefits of NgRx Component Store. No stupid Angular modules. Just services, functions. Much better, much better. So let me fire up Wallaby again. Here we go. And what do we actually need? Okay, so we need to remove this export, and we can export just an empty object for now. Remove this one. And let's create the, well, we need an HTTP client that we can trigger in our component store effects. Yeah, let's create that first. So let's go back to the Energy Data Service in Denmark. And find this API. It's called CO2 emission prognosis. So I will start by creating the, well, let's say I have an HTTP folder here. Call it CO2 emission prognosis HTTP. And it's an Angular service. So it's an injectable and might be missing some plugin here. I remember the namespaces myself. And now this one can be, this will be a stateless service, so we can just provide it in the root, so have one instance for the whole application. And calling it the CO2 emission prognosis HTTP. This will be an internal service, so it won't be in our public API file here. And to call this API, let's go. Oh, Let's go into the data set, and we can then see here, if we go to our Chrome DevTools, let's see if I can zoom in that one as well. Go to network, look for the AJAX requests, and submit another one. I can see these two here. They're slightly different for some reason. Oh yeah, there's the number. So this is it's using this CCAN data provider or framework, which is based on Python and Postgres, but it has this web API on top of it. So I can use the same API here. So this is the URL I want to call. Get that in here. Start here for now. And then let's see, what is the request? It's a GET request, okay. And does it have any GET parameters? Yeah, it has one query string parameter called SQL or SQL, and it actually has a SQL query inside of a query string parameter. And yeah, I know this already because I'm using it at work, because we make software for the energy industry at System Mate. So I'll have to call it with a SQL parameter, a query string, with a SQL Postgres SQL query, like so. So that's pretty strange, but also in a funny way, it's also very flexible because you can write arbitrary select queries here. It's read-only, so I can't change anything, but I can select and I can get the server to do the job of processing and mapping, renaming, all of that. So there is a table here. It's called CO2 emis prog for emission prognosis, and it has these columns. A date. Well, we can see it here in the network tab. If I go to the response preview, you can see that there's a success true. This will be false if there's an error. It has a result property here, and this is the field definition of the different this record array has objects. Each object or each column in this table actually has these fields with these Postgres types. So it's a time zone timestamp. So that means we can take one here and see that it has the UTC offset, which is what we always want, because this one is the local Danish time. But then I'll have to figure out, which time zone were we in Denmark at this point. So this one is much better because it's specifically, it's a very specific moment in time. So there's no ambiguity about this. There's also the price area. So we had the two in Denmark, DK1 and DK2. And then there's the CO2 emission. So this is the grams of CO2 equivalent greenhouse gases emitted per produced kilowatt hour of energy. So this is the data I have available in this API. So I'll just call this one get, and it will return an observable. And yeah, we need to create a type. But for now, let's create one here. This is the name of this interface. This one was well, we can map it to a date. This one we actually don't even want to download because I don't want to use that one. But I want the price area. For now, I'll just use this type, DK1 or DK2. And the CO2 emission. It's a number. So we want to return a read-only array of these records. Read only. And this is the observable from RxJS. Good. Now we need the implementation, right? But first, let's start setting up the test for this already now. So I'll have a file called the same, but then .spec.ts in the end. And it will have some string here, and then a callback grouping the test cases. This is my test suite. And now you can actually see Wallaby running the tests here and saying all is good in this test file. Let me import the subject under test, the SUT. This is this HTTP client. And here, instead of a string, I can take the name of this class, so that if I rename it, it will also be renamed rather than having a hard-coded string here. Let's set up the first test case. I don't really know what I want to test right now. But I know that we want a variable of the HTTP client here for each test case. And how would we get that? We would do that. Let's do it in the before each hook. That's our setup for each test case. So we'll use Angular's testbed. Why? Because then it will set up, we can set up, we can use Angular's dependency injection system to set up the dependencies. But we won't run compile components, so it won't be slow. So this is an Angular core testing testbed. And we just need the inject here. Inject method. Don't have any dependencies yet. So we will resolve this dependency, store it in the HTTP variable. So what can we do here? We can call the get method, right? And it doesn't have any parameters right now. What would we do? I mean, do we want to use async await, or I don't know how to use Rx marbles for testing. That's usually the way to go. But I don't know how. I haven't invested the time to learn it properly yet. So I'm doing other things instead, which is usually enough unless you're doing complex timing issues or something like that. So yeah, what could we do? We could do, is it in Rx7 or is it already just take last or take first, or what is it called? Let's see. Well, we can just, is it still to promise? Let's use that for now. This is good for this one. So this will be an async function, and we will, if I could spell, we would await. Oh, it's not even a separate operator, is it? Await, come on, keyboard. It's not my hands. Sure. Okay, the result. Expect the result to be empty array. And let's return an observable of the empty array for now. Oh, I want it from RxJS. Here we go. And oops. Let's look here. Oh, to equal. To be is strict equal, so it has to be the exact same array. Here we're saying it's an empty array, any empty array, not a specific one. So this is actually a running test now. Look at what we have tested. Wow. So this is the start. And what do we have? Do we actually have test coverage for this project? Let's see. Let's have a look. One test running in 12 milliseconds, and our test coverage is 100%. Look at that. Everything is covered. We're so good at this. Yeah. Resolves an array. That's it for now. Okay. Add HTTP client for the CO2 emission prognosis dataset. Let's push this branch so we don't lose any work. So yeah, is this enough? I mean, we just basically right now to create the component store, we just need some service that we can call, that we can trigger through the effect. So this is actually enough to get started with the component store. So let's do that just for fun. But of course, this is not a proper implementation yet. But yeah, an empty array is an array of these data structures. So this is actually good enough for now. And let's get into the component store instead. Let's create a state here. Oh, and I'm already starting to regret that I named this one HTTP. I want to call it CO2 forecast instead, and luckily it wasn't exported or referenced by other files. So yeah, this shouldn't be a problem. Renaming this folder because I want to group the files that will change together, and that would be the component store and the HTTP client. It wouldn't be two separate HTTP client or two separate component stores. So grouping by type is usually not a good idea. It won't serve you well. So on the top levels, you should group by the area or the domain or the logical group, and that's what I'm trying to do here. So let's do the component store. This will be called the CO2 forecast store. What do we need? First we need from Angular core, we need the injectable decorator factory. Yes, it is not a decorator, it's a factory. As you can see here, we're calling it with parameters, and the factory returns a decorator that is then applied to the class. Very complicated. It's Angular after all. CO2 forecast store. Okay, what does it need to do? It shouldn't be provided, so I shouldn't do this because we want it to be scoped on us like the right level of the application. And this is one of the nice parts about component store. We can provide it on a specific page, for example, a page component, or even more locally on a, let's say, a chart component. And whenever the page is destroyed, whenever the page is destroyed, for example, when you route to a different page, the page component will be destroyed, and that will then if that page component is providing this component store, the component store and all of the subscriptions it's managing, all the observables, will also be turned down. So this is nice. This is what we need to think about. Which scope should this component store have? And this one is not specific to a component necessarily. This is for the data access, the state that might be. Right now it's not shared, but I'll build it as if it was a shared one, because we might need to combine this data with some other data at some point. So we'll find the right scope eventually. And I should be, when I talk about the code, I should be sharing my screen again. So here it is. So yeah, we need to find the right scope. What else? To create a component store, we need to extend the component store base class. It's called like so. So we say extends component store, and then we need shape of the state here. So that will be called CO2 forecast state. It's always an object. Everything else NgRx. So what do we need in here? We need, well, for now, let's just have these records. It will be in read-only property, which is a read-only array of this this thing. So actually, let's extract this into a separate file. Now we need it in 2 files already, so which the export should have told us, but it wasn't necessary until now. So we need it in here, in the HTTP service. Now we have it. And now we need it in our component store as well. So let's import it. There we go. And I usually create this type with a name. So let's do that. And put it in the same file. So a type, which is called CO2 emission prognosis records, is a read-only array of CO2 emission prognosis records. So a fitting name, hopefully. And yeah, I prefer to use read-only arrays, read-only properties, read-only objects, because then you're forcing yourself into thinking in immutable data, which can always be only a pleasant surprise, rather than having shared mutatable state that can only give you nasty surprises. Okay, so this is our state. We have some records, and we need to get them from somewhere. But yeah, this is actually, now we have a component store that does nothing. So we need to, before we can update the state or parts of the state, before we can create effects or before we subscribe to the observables, we need to initialize it. So how would we do that? Well, we would have down here, doesn't have to be exported. Let's create a variable called initial state with the shape of this store state. This store state has records, so we can do an empty array as the initial state. So we say super initial state. So we're calling the constructor of the component store class from NgRx. We're passing it the initial state. You might also do this at a later point in time, but you have to make sure that you're initializing the state You could do this also by saying set state and pass it the full state here. So we might also have done it like so at any point in time. But before anyone actually, I guess, what is it like? Before you can call patch state, or before you can, what is it like? Subscribe to the selected state or something. Yeah, you'll get a runtime error if you don't do this at the proper time. So let's just initialize it here in the constructor. This is the basics of an NgRx component store. Now we have a component store that has this internal state. And this is really, these records, it's the internal state. It's not what I want to expose. So maybe I want to map this into something that's more useful to my components. We'll get to that soon enough. For now, what did we do? We created this component store. That's the primary thing here. And how about adding some tests for this one? Better do it now, or it will be later, as in never. Do the describe block, we need the string, and then we have a group of test cases, and this is the test suite. We import this object under test, which is the store. It's called, not state, it's called CO2 forecast store. So we use the name of this class as the description of this test suite. And now we can add a test case here. And now Wallaby is happy running the test. So we need some setup. Okay, so here, so for component stores, it's not very good to do what we did before with the HTTP client, having a shared variable. So here we can use this other pattern of having a setup function that could take some parameters. And I don't want to add the type because that will change a lot. But here we can say we want the store. And again, we will be using the testbed to inject this store to resolve this dependency. And then we will return an object of everything that we need for our tests. And this will for now just be the store. But now we have a problem because if we use this here, if we call down here, we'll see that we actually have a problem. Say we just want to expect that it hasn't, but it has been resolved or resolved. So now we'll see, we will tell us here, there's no provider for the CO2 forecast store because it doesn't have a provider scope here defined. In the application, we would need to provide it in some component. Don't provide it in a module. So here in the test, we need to provide it in the test bed with our testing module. So we'll add here the providers for this store. And now it's happy. Look at that. It's green. And the reason for calling it specifically this function rather than running it in a before each hook is that we need to set up some stop dependencies usually to be able to control the data flow in and out of this store. And usually you'll have some logic that's initialized by the store, or sometimes right away when it's created. So logic effects will start processing immediately. So we need to set up some, like, stub out the HTTP client, for example, before that happens. And control what it's responding with. So for the sake of the test. So to do that, we'll pass that into this setup function here. So we'll cover the CO2 forecast store in our test. And we could take a look again at the Coverage Explorer, or we could look at my Wallaby tab here. And the test touched by this, the class is touched by this file, says that it has 100% test coverage. We can actually also see it here. Every line of code has a green, meaning that there's a test exercising this part of the code and the test is passing. So that's good. We're not testing much, but we have 100% test coverage. So now comes the question, which side effects should we have? And also, importantly, which public properties do we want to have from this store? I mean, for now, we could just export or make it a public property for these records until we know what we need. That could be a good starting point. So that would be an observable of these records. Should use the type I created, by the way. And with Component Store, we can, we're extending this base class, the Component Store. That gives us three important methods. One is select, one is effect, and the last one is updater. And there's a few others. For this one, let's go with select, and then we pass it a callback here. It takes the store state as a parameter, and then we say, okay, which property of that state do we want to select? That's the records. So now we have a public observable of our records. So if anyone subscribes to that, they will receive the update for that every time there's new data. So that is part of this. Do we have it covered now by tests? No, we don't. See, look here. There's a white rectangle here. And I could also say toggle uncovered code regions, and it would tell me that this part of the code, it's now highlighted in yellow. This part of the code is, this is Wallaby doing this. It's never touched by any test, so it's not covered. So there's no code being run by a test that actually touches this part of the code base right now. So how could we test that? We could say we want to, I should name it $, because that's the convention to use this Hungarian notation. So I want to add tests about this observable in particular. Emits records. This is the basic test here. How can we test that? We could say it initially emits 0 records. Make it async. We could say we're creating the store, so we run the setup and we extract the store from that returned object. And then we say it has the records observable. We will pipe into that. We will take the first. I really need to figure out which extension I'm missing to do these auto imports. Getting really annoying. RxJ operators. Luckily, I know a lot of these by heart by now. We'll take the first value, and that will mean that this observable will create complete. So now we can turn it into a promise. So this will be our records. Wait, the promise. Wait, I can spell. So expect records to equal the empty array. Look at that. Okay, so but for every green test, it must have been red at first, or we don't know if we're testing the right thing. So what if we instead initialized it with a record here? Let's say there was 180 grams of CO2 per produced kilowatt hour at this point in time. These are, let's see, these are actually 5-minute values, as the property suggests. But yeah, it's the 19th of May. And which minute are we in right now? We're in Danish local time. It's 22:15. So this is the start of this 5-minute interval. And I'm in 2 hours offset from UTC. And we need the price area. I'm in DK1, so this will be my record here. Oh, it's a date. Okay, so we'll construct it here. So now, what are we getting? We're getting a failing test because this is what we're expecting. This is what we're receiving, an array with an object in it. So we are testing the right thing here. So if we adjust the implementation to our expectation, which is an empty array initially, now it's running. So yay me. Oh, Michael, you're saying it's Finnish notation. Okay, so which one is Hungarian? Which one is Finnish notation? Let's Google it. I can't remember now. Observables and Finnish notations. Yeah. And what is Hungarian notation? It was used a lot a few decades ago. Oh, okay, yeah. So Hungarian is the prefix notation. So you would call something array of unsigned 8-bit integers. So that's the type in the start of the name. And then it's a list of numbers. Or it's a long account number. Long is a data type, right? What is long is 64? No, that's... Oh, long is integer 64 bits, I think. I don't even remember. Like, who cares about data types today? But yeah, that's the Hungarian notation. So Finnish would be the prefix or the suffix. And that's what you get with RxJS now. There's a dollar in the end. We used to put the dollar in front of jQuery objects not too long ago. And now this annoying habit of dollars in the end of RxJS observables. And there's a story about this. I wonder if it's mentioned here. I actually don't want to open this article because it's on Medium. Well, if it's not behind the paywall, I will read it. Yay, Ben Lesh, not behind the paywall. There's a story. I wonder if he's mentioning it here. It actually used to be like, can I get that up here? I don't know if you can see this. But... No, it's too small. I don't want to change it. Let's go back to the editor. So I called this one record dollars. Back in the day, that would be record dollar, and because dollar looks like a fancy S, and there would be other symbols for, I don't know. Let's say we had an observable of a librarian, then there would be a special N number here, or if it ended in an E, there would. What ends in an E? I don't know. as Siri, it would have the euro sign because that's a fancy E. So it's stupid things like that. And now we're stuck with this stupid notation. I thought we got rid of that when we left jQuery behind, but apparently not. So now we have to tell everyone all the time, this is an observable. It's very important. It has $1. Look at that. So is there the story of this? Finish RxJS notation. Yeah, here it is. Look at that. Mice. People with the euro sign. Yeah, this is so dumb. But now, yeah, of course, this is too strange, and you don't want to fiddle around to find all these special symbols. And you saw even that the euro sign is not something you can just use here. People observable euro. JavaScript is not happy about the euro sign. Invalid character, so it doesn't even work. But of course, Rx was first done in .NET, and I don't remember if this is something you can do in .NET. But yeah, strange story, strange convention. I really don't see the purpose of it, but it's what we do, so I'll do it as well. But I won't enjoy it. You can't make me enjoy it. Don't force me. Yeah, sidetrack. The story of the dollar sign, the the Finnish notation of RxJS. Yeah. Where did we come from? Okay, so we actually added the test here. So, yay me, add another commit. What? What was that? Okay, the commit worked. I don't know, just ignore it. So I'll push this to the branch. And we've been going now for an hour and a quarter. But yeah, let's do at least one more thing. What should we do? Should we do an effect? Or should we do the HTTP client? What do you say? I'll have a drink of water. Which one? HTTP client with strange SQL in the query string, or NgRx Component Store effect? Which one do we do? The effect. Okay. We have two people here voting. Christopher, nice to see you. Voting for effect. We have Michael as well voting for effect. Okay, so we'll focus on the NgRx Component Store. So we had these three methods that we can use. We saw one of them here, this.select. We can select from the store, the store state. We can actually also select from any observable here. For example, a global NgRx store, or any observable for that matter from any service that we can inject. So that was one of them. And now, first of all, we need something to be able to update this records property. We already did it once, but that was only to initialize the state here. So if there's an update over time, what do? We need an updater. That's what we do. And let's make it private, because I don't want a component to update this state. I want an effect to do it only. So, oh yeah, switch my view. Thank you. I want to take a look at you sometimes, and then I forget to add back to the code view. Here we go. Okay, going back, cycling back a second here. We have the select inherited method for selecting a property of our store state. But we could also select any observable here to expose that or to combine it with the state, maybe. Any effect will work here. Any observable will work here with the select method. But what else? Now we want to change this records state. We did it once here when we called the base constructor from the component store class. We passed it the initial state, but this only works once. When we then want to change this property later, we need an updater. That's one of the ways to do it, at least. So say update records. Then we call this.updater, and this is then a function, and that function has this current state, and then we need to return state. So that will be another object here. We'll spread the current state in, and what would we do? We would, it will be an updater, and it will be passed state and then the updated value, and the updated value will then be, let's say, these records that has this interface, this type. So put that in here. Then this will be the updated records that will be passed here. But let's just call it records, because then we can spread the state as it is. It doesn't have any other properties right now, but it might at some point. But we'll put in these new records here. So this is shorthand syntax for like so. So that's why I'm naming the local variable records, because it makes it easier to map it into this new state object. So that's what we're returning. So this is how it looks. It's kind of a reducer for one action with this on method in the NgRx store, if you remember that. So what this returns is a method that we can call. So say here we had another value. We can now call update records, and we could give it either an observable of records, or we could pass it just an array of records. So this is the result of calling the updater here is we get a method that we can call with this value. And if it's an observable that we pass here, NgRx will subscribe internally to that observable. If it's a value, it will just be passed this value once. And we will also be passed the current state. So we will slab in this new array of records to replace the existing state, which might not always be the best option, but it's the most simple one. So we needed this updater, and it's a private one because I don't want components to update it. I only want effects to update it. I want this to run in the background. So then now we need an effect. That's the third inherited method we have. We had this select method. We had the updater method, and now we need this effect method. So this will also be a method, and let's call it load records every. This is updated every 5 minutes, so I want to look for an update every minute. It should be like so. Effect, and this we need a callback here, and this callback will be passed an observable of whatever we want. So what would we want to trigger this? Well, in this case, what would we want to pass to this HTTP client? Would we want to, let's go back to that. That was not the client. It's difficult with the Zoom level. Which one is the service here? This one is, okay. So this should this have any parameters? That's the question. And yeah, it should. Like it should say which which records are we interested in, which time, and maybe which price area. Is it DK1 or DK2, or is it both? I actually want to return both, but in a specific time. So it should be, for example, from and to, something like that. So that's what we need to pass in. But right now, let's just have one without the parameters for this to get going. So yeah. Yeah, but we need something to kick this off. So it could be the query filter observable. And this would, so let's say, from, to, and these are read-only properties. So this is what we want. We want an interval, a time interval of date times. So I think we can do it like so. And now this will be an observable of this query filter. So now we need to take that. I know this is looking a little strange. We'll have another look at it. Let me just maximize here, this view. So we get an observable here, and we'll see where that comes from in a moment. And now we need to do something. We need to kick off an effect. So let's say the first time or any time a value is emitted, we want to load the new record using the HTTP client. Okay, so we need the HTTP client now. CO2 emission prognosis HTTP. Yeah, here it is. So we take the observable, we pipe, and now we switch map. Why do we switch map? Because if we're suddenly interested in another from and to date, we're no longer interested in the previous request that didn't return yet. So the switch strategy will then cancel the previous HTTP request and send a new one instead to replace it. So we will get the query filter, which again will be this type, right? Something is wrong right now, but yeah, we'll fix it. This.http.get. We would pass in the query filter here. What is going on right now? Function not implemented. Switch map. Where did I get switch map from? Oh, my bad. I'm still missing this like auto import. I don't know which extension I forgot. Okay, so switch map, of course, comes from RxJS operators. Now it's happy. Thanks for the switch map explanation. Well, you're welcome. You're welcome. Yeah, we have these different options of switching, which cancels when we're talking about HTTP requests, it will cancel the previous request whenever a new one arrives or is created. We could do concat, that would put them in like a serial mode, like queue them up, and when one finishes, it will start the next one. So that's also a way of avoiding timing issues, but it might delay the response you were looking for. And there's merge, that is, it will fire up all the requests you're making, and you'll get a response, maybe not in order, and that's where the issue comes in, because then you're getting a response for the old query parameters not the most current ones. So that's usually not a good strategy for HTTP requests. And we also have exhaust that won't start any new requests if there is a current one running right now. And that might make sense. For example, if you have an issue of excessive requests and you can't figure out why, put in the exhaust map operator, and it won't make new requests while you have some already in flight. But yeah, switch map is usually good when dealing with HTTP requests. Let's get back to the code. I remember this time. Okay, so we won't be using this right now, but we will pass it here at some point when we set up the HTTP client to accept that. For now, we will get back the result of calling this HTTP client. So that is the read-only array of CO2 emission prognosis records, these objects. And what else do we need to do? Yeah, let's see. NgRx Component Store has this operator called tab response. And that one goes, let's see, should use it here. That will force us to have we'll have one for so we got the records, everything went well. Okay, what do we do with the records? And then an error. Okay, we had some error response here. What do we do with that? It will force us into handling these two cases, because if we don't handle the error cases, the RxJS chain will break, so our effect will break as well. So this is a good little utility from NgRx Component Store when dealing with HTTP clients, for example, because if we handle it, both of these cases, everything will be good. So this would be an unknown thingy. And we don't really care why it errored right now. But what we will do is we will say update the records, and we'll just put in a blank array here to clear our chart if there's an error. I mean, we might put in an error message and whatnot and log it, but that's for another time. Okay, so when things go well, what do we do with the records? We call our updater function, update records, and pass in the new records here that we got from the HTTP client, these CO2 emission prognosis records. So this is what we're using our updater for. We call it, if there's an error, we clear the array. If we get back new records, we will put them in the records property by using this updater. So this is one way of updating the state. There is actually another way. Let me just, what happened there? Let me show you that one as well. We get the records, and then what? Well, we can call patch state. That is a partial update of the store state. So we could say, well, we have some new records, put them in the store, please. So that's another way. Then we don't need to create this updater at all. We could comment this one out, and we would be able to update the store state. However, one issue I see with this is now we don't have a central location for every state update going through for this property. Because right now you can see here I have one reference that's in the error case. And if I use the updater in the success case as well, now I can see that the records are updated in two places. Where is that? That's these two cases in this HTTP response. So now I can both see what's the source of the updates, and also, okay, so maybe I wanted to do some mapping or what do I know, some validation, something here. Well, I shouldn't throw errors in an updater, but maybe I wanted to change something here or log something. And now I have a central place to do that. So I will stick with the updaters, because then I have an overview of where that state is being updated, because we might have many effects and observables and stuff updating. Okay, so this is our effect. One thing left to do. This will return a function that we can call. So now this the result of calling the effect method is a method that we can then call from somewhere else in our service to pass it either a value of this query filter or an observable of this query filter, and it returns a subscription. We don't want to manage subscriptions ourselves, but that's what the NgRx Component Store will actually do that for us. So we don't have to, I'm pretty sure we don't have to store that subscription ourselves. I might be wrong. I might need to look into this. But I'm pretty sure it will be shut down when the service is shut down. So just make sure we have the right provider scope. Okay, but the last step here is now we have this effect, but we need to initialize the effect. We need to kick it off. And we could do that, for example, here in the constructor. We could say load records every minute, and then we need to pass it either a value of dates, or it could be an observable, because what would change these two values? Well, if the user wanted to browse different days, but that's not really the case for a forecast. We want to look at the future, not the past. But it could also, if we had a filter of the what's called the price area, right? Maybe the user selected now they wanted to go to DK1 instead of the DK2 price area. And in that case, we wanted an observable. Right now, yeah, now we're going to need a date library of some kind. But since we don't really have an implementation yet for this HTTP client anyways, we're just passing random dates here. It doesn't matter right now. So this is what we need to do to kick off the effect. So, but this is only one value, so it would just call the effect or trigger it once, because this, you can see here, this value, this object is turned into, by NgRx Component Store, it's turned into an observable, and we then pipe some additional operations on top of that observable. So the switch map operation, which triggers the call to HTTP client, our own HTTP client. And then additionally, we handle the error case. If there's an error in this response, we will clear the array of records. If everything goes well, we will stuff in the new records that are in from the response into our store, so that components can then get those new records, right? So yeah, this is a bit to wrap your head around, but this is basically the three parts of the NgRx Component Store: the selectors, the updaters, and the effects. Now we have triggered this effect once. And this would mean in the application, we would load it every time the page is shown for the first time, or when we navigate away and then back, this effect would be triggered. Every time this service, the store, is initialized, we would trigger this effect once. But I did call it load records every minute for a reason, because I want to not only kick it off or trigger it initially, I want it to run every minute. So how could we do that? Well, this is one trigger. Whenever the query changes, we want a new request to be sent. But we could also say, now we're getting into, there might be a better way for NgRx or Component Store that I'm not aware of, but I would do Is it timer or an interval? Let's look at the docs. Because I wanted to run initially. Yeah, Black Lives Matter. Look at the timer operator, creator function. Let's look at this one. Does it kick off initially? Where's the marble diagram? No marble diagrams? No, they are gone. Oh no. What do we do? Okay, let's see here. So this is the timer operator. So the interval operator waits for the pass delay before starting. And that's not always what we want. We might want it to start. Oh, that's too much zoom, sorry. We might want it to start immediately. And timer is a good use case for this. Yeah. So we can say timer 0, because that's the initial delay. And then we can say the number of milliseconds for each time it's then triggered. So I'll copy this into the code. And then it will be every minute, right? So that would be 60 times 1,000. So every minute, and initially this observer will emit. So let's import the timer. It's a creator function, so it should be here in RxJS. It is. So now we have two sources. Oh, we need the combine latest as well. That's from operators. Isn't it? No, it's a static one. Yeah, I forgot. Combine latest. So this is saying we have two sources. We have every time the query filter is changed, which it doesn't right now, but it will at some point. And or every time, or and every time the timer emits a value, we will get switch map here will be called, and we could. This will be an array, so we'll also have the timer value, but we can't really use that for anything. But that would be a number, and I think it starts with 0 or 1 or something. We can't really use that for anything right now, but we can use this query filter, and that will also be passed every time the timer emits, because that's what the combine latest function does. It subscribes to both of these observables, and every time one of them emits, well, after they have both emitted once, then switch map will be called, and then every time one of them updates, it will take the latest value of both of them that has been emitted, pass it on to this switch map here. So now we actually have a background sync every minute, and initially we will call this HTTP client, and we will stuff in these records. So this is now our effect is triggered, and well, initially and every minute. So that's good. So let's just commit that. Load records every minute and initially. Let's look at what we have here. Okay, there's one more thing. The select method has, you can pass it an object in the end, which is an option, and you can say debounce true. So if you have a lot of state changes in your store, and like they're happening within the same synchronous VM turn, or maybe the micro tasks as well. I don't really recall. But like if you have several sources of updates, for example, yeah, like these two will combine latest will wait for both of them to trigger. So timer will trigger immediately, and this one will get a value from the query filter immediately as well. But if we had like if these two changed within at the same time, this component subscribing to this observable, they would only be called once because we're basically adding a debounce operator. I think it is a debounce async, so it's kind of, I think it's like what's it called? Like well, it's using the VM turn to synchronize updates so that the components will only receive one update per VM turn, the JavaScript VM. So it's a good default to add. I don't know if it has any significant performance issue. I don't think it should. So yeah, so I add them usually by default. To my selectors, my observables here. Debounce records. Okay, so what we are missing is testing. As we can see here, Wallaby is telling me with the white rectangles that this part of the code is not being touched by any tests. I could also say toggle the uncovered code regions, and it will be highlighted here in yellow. So this code is never being called as part of a test. But yeah, this is, we won't do this today because it's getting late. It will be 11 o'clock at night soon, and it is now after dark indeed. But yeah, this would be a good case for RxJS marbles, but I don't know how to use them basically. So I have another way of testing it, but yeah, we'll do that some other time to get back to that magic 100% test coverage, because right now we're only at 80%, and that's not good enough. So I'll push my updates here, and yeah, that's what we did for today. We created our component store. We created an HTTP client. They don't actually do anything right now. I mean, every minute the effect will call the HTTP client and it will just give it back an empty array. But you can see that we're starting to make these connections between the services, and we're setting up the triggers. Of course, we don't have any components, so if we started the app, nothing would happen. We're not even importing this library yet. But yeah, I'm trying to show how we can use tests instead to think about how the current code will interact at runtime, and to test it, of course, so that we know it will always work as expected. So Christopher, you're saying great stream, thanks. Well, thank you for joining. It was one of the long sessions, but I hope all of you learned something. I recently started using NgRx Component Store, and I'm very happy. I'm definitely going to replace the big store and the big effects, because this is much nicer in my opinion and has a lot of good use cases. We can also use it for presenters, for presentational components. That's a different type of store though. This one is for, the one we created here is actually for, well, either it's for shared state or it's for like isolated state. That's might not be specific to one component. So it could be shared, maybe not on the global level. It's not something we need many places in this app, but it might be something we need in, for example, 2 charts on the same page. So it is somewhere between a local scope and a global scope. Probably a local scope, because it's local to one page, probably. I mean, right now it'll be local to one chart, the very first one for this app. There's also another type of component store where you create one specifically for a component. So whatever the component needs, it will have an observable in the component store. But this one is more, for now, something that can be used by multiple components, and they will have to map the observables themselves if they want it in another format, another structure. So Christopher, you have not used Component Store yet. See if it is a better fit for your project. You've used the global NgRx Store before a lot. Okay, well, good news. It's really easy to get started if you're already familiar with NgRx Store and effects, because it's basically a mini version of that. It has some of the same concepts. Let's take a look here at the NgRx documentation, and I can show you where you would want to read about this. Because of course there is we have this state section, and we can find here the component store. And like we discussed in the beginning, it doesn't have any dependencies on the other packages, so it's standalone. Yeah, Michael is saying he hasn't touched the global store since he began component store, and I definitely agree. Every time I look at my store and effects now, I'm thinking I should put that in a component store. I hate that it's in the store and the effects. So much code for so little being done. I really like that. My favorite part is probably there's no ng modules. I had a really complicated setup of a lot of NX libraries and interdependencies of modules, and you have to import that module in your module to use it in a component or in a service, and that's just messy. It doesn't feel right, and it's a lot of complicated work for doing very little. Okay, so here, the NgRx Component Store. I should share my screen again when I'm talking about it. So we're here on the NgRx IO docs. We open up the state section, went to the component store, and I would suggest looking at the architecture here. These 4 pages is what you need to get going. So it talks about what we also saw, how you can initialize the store state, how you can lazily initialize it. So that would be at some point you call set state and pass it a full state object here. So that could be in here, they're doing it in a component, in its on init hook. That really hurts my eyes. I wouldn't recommend that. But this is an example of a component store specifically for this component, to the point that, yeah, they're actually like managing the state inside of the component. I wouldn't do that. That's not for my taste. But you can do it. You can do it, and in this way you don't even have to subclass the component store. But I would do that. It's easier to test because you don't need the component. And the component shouldn't really be messing around with low-level APIs like here. Okay, so that's initialization and lazy initialization. Then you have read. That's the selectors that we also saw. Select from, this.select, select the movies property, for example. The write, that's the updaters. But you can also use set state. If you call set state, you have to pass it the whole, like a full state object. Not patch state can be 1 or 2 properties. And then the final one is my preferred one, the updater, like we saw here. So it will be passed the current state. So it's a reducer function. It will be passed the current state and this new value, whatever you're calling it with. That will be a movie object in this case. So here they are taking the existing movies array and appending this new movie into this array. So yeah, that's the updater, and it would be called from here. It's public, so it would probably be called from inside the component, which I wouldn't recommend. I would recommend managing the effects, the side effects inside of the component store class, your subclass. Yeah, but that's the right section. That's the updater, set state, and patch state. And effects here, we also saw that. That's the side effect. So that's similar to the NgRx effects, but it's being set up inside of the same service and has this kind of you have to get used to this new. It's a bit similar to the effects of NgRx effects, but here instead of subscribing to the action stream, you will be passed a value, any value that you decide, and you will then have to pass it in somewhere. Did they even call it? No. Oh yeah, here they're doing it inside of components. No, where are they calling this effect? Oh, okay, so they're actually. This is very. I really don't like this, but you can do it this way as well. Yeah, the effect. It will get passed an observable of some value, which is kind of the parameters for your effect or the sources of updates for triggering this effect. And then you go and do something here like fetching movies from a backend or something. We did it for the records. And let's see. Michael is saying, now you can add the store to your one file component. No. That's going too far. I don't want my component to be a component store. But yeah, I'm trying to do single file components. But components are about presentation, not about states, and definitely not about some external isolated state like the one we just created. Components can be concerned with local UI state, and that's another use case for the NgRx Component Store, a presenter service, a presentational service for the local state of one component. That would be scoped to that component, and it wouldn't have any side effects for triggering HTTP clients. That should be done in another service, another component store. So read these 4 architecture pages if you're already used to NgRx store and effects, then you'll quickly get the hang of it. And it's like it takes you maybe an hour to read it a few times and try to understand it. And then there's some longer usage examples here. And there's 4 different use cases, but there's still only one written about here. That's the local UI state, like I just described. Let's see if we can do some of the other use cases later this year. I would like to contribute now that I've started using it. And inside here of the component store versus store, Alex Okrushko has described like what's the compared to the global store and effects. What should you pick? What's the trade-offs? Yeah, so that could be interesting. Alex also has a lot of talks about this topic, so that's where you should go look. But first of all, if you know the store and effects, look at those 4 architecture pages, and you'll figure it out. I did really quickly, so I'm sure you can as well. So that's all for today for NX After Dark and working on this Energy Insights Angular app. We started laying the foundation for our data access layer. We created this HTTP client that doesn't do anything yet, but we set up the effect to trigger it in our component store, and we tested 80% of it. So a good start, but not good enough. We'll have to continue some other day. Thank you for joining, and see you around. Thank you, Christopher, and thank you, Michael, and anyone else watching. Bye.